Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I shall be counting down the top 10 worst episodes of The Walking Dead. As always with these lists, the entries are purely based on my opinion alone and I won't be holding back on any spoilers, so if that bothers you then please don't carry on watching. I want to quickly mention before people start accusing me of being too negative that I will be doing a follow up to this video in which I count down my favourite Walking Dead episodes in the near future, so please keep an eye out for that. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. The number 10 entry on this list is the only episode from the latest season of The Walking Dead to be featured, which I'm sure may come as a surprise to some of you. Despite my feelings of disappointment regarding how the first half of season 8 ended, I do actually think the season got off to a flying start, with the opening installments being pretty entertaining. However, from the 6th episode onwards, the overall quality quickly started to deteriorate. I know I did bring up some negative points regarding this entry in my initial review, but I don't think I was overwhelmingly down on the episode. But looking back on it now, its flaws are even more apparent to me, which is why it just about squeezes its way into this video. My main problem with the King, the Widow and Rick is that the characters make too many stupid decisions. For example, I have no idea why Rick thought it would be a wise move to go back to the Scavengers, a group who had completely screwed him over first time around. I know that Rick said he needed the extra support, but charging into the headquarters of a group who have already proven that they can't be trusted completely on his lonesome with no backup is pretty bad writing. Whilst I'm on the subject of bad writing, you know I'm going to have to mention Carl getting bit by a walker that was minding its own business. Carl could have simply ignored the walker, but instead he chose not to and suffered a bite in the most pathetic way imaginable. I'm not going to say any more about it as I've already spoken about this at length in many videos, however with Rick and Carl both acting like complete idiots, it would appear that dumbness may actually run in their family. Aside from these two instances, I also found the rest of the episode to be far too fractured and all over the place, resulting in it not really doing a good job with any of the plot points that it tried so desperately to put across. Hopefully the rest of season 8 can be more like the episodes that came before this one. Despite the hate that the second season of The Walking Dead frequently gets, I actually consider it to be a pretty decent chapter of the show. However, I can't deny that there are definitely an abundance of pacing issues present, and Chubacabra is the stellar example of an episode in which the narrative doesn't really move forward at all. Chubacabra's main focus centres on Daryl's continuing efforts to find Sophia. Whilst he is out on a horseback looking for her, the horse gets spooked by a snake which causes Daryl to fall off it from some height. Upon landing, he manages to injure himself with one of his arrowheads and the situation turns into a desperate attempt in which he has to get back to the farm as soon as possible. Admittedly, I do like that as a viewer I was given the chance to witness Daryl's survival skills as well as his sheer determination, but ultimately in the long run this episode is kind of pointless and could easily be described as filler. I mean, when you think about it in terms of overarching plot, practically nothing changes. Daryl goes out to find Sophia, injures himself and then comes back. There's no progress to be found, Sophia is still gone and everyone is still on the farm. I mean, you could probably skip this episode and not really miss out on anything. Looking back on this episode now, I can't help but see the similarities between this entry and Fear the Walking Dead's episode grotesque. During Fear's entry, the protagonist Nick also finds himself alone and struggling to survive. He comes into contact with bandits, wild dogs and of course walkers, but manages to see it all through. So why then do I like this episode so much more than Chubacabra? Well, not only in my opinion does grotesque portray a lone person's struggle to survive in a much more interesting manner, it also helps set up the latter half of the season as Nick encounters a new community and is taken in by them. It's not just a case of Nick wandering around the desert for an hour and then returning back to his mama, the plot actually advances and this episode feels necessary. Chubacabra on the other hand doesn't really feel necessary. It doesn't matter how good Michael Rooker is in his guest appearance as a figment of Daryl's imagination, I still find this episode to be extremely dull, and one of the worst installments of The Walking Dead second season. I think there's going to be some people surprised by some of my entries amongst this list due to the inclusion of a few episodes that people may not immediately think of as being some of the show's worst, and I'm sure that my choice of 30 Days Without an Accident will cause confusion amongst many. All in all, the season 4 premiere seems to have been positively received by most critics and fans alike. I, however, cannot stand this episode, and before you all jump down my throat, let me explain why. So I've mentioned in a previous video that I got into The Walking Dead relatively late into its lifespan. In fact, I was so late to the party initially that the first 4 seasons of the show were already available for me to binge through at my leisure. After racing through the first 3 seasons in a matter of weeks, I watched the season 4 premiere and I found myself hating pretty much everything about it. In fact, I disliked it so much that I didn't resume watching the show until at least another few weeks had passed. I have such disdain for this episode because to me it felt so out of place. The reason being is that after the conclusion to Season 3, I was expecting an immediate follow-up to the Governor's failed attack on the prison. Instead, what I got was an episode full of random red shirt characters who I couldn't care less about, and for some reason Rick spent almost the whole runtime attempting to help some random Irish hobo, who again I didn't give a shit about. It honestly felt that I was watching a different show entirely to the previous season, and to me the transition from the Season 3 finale to the Season 4 premiere seemed really weird and unnatural. I'll admit this is probably the hardest entry on this list for me to accurately put into words the reason why I hate it so, but all I remember is being overcome by this huge feeling of what the hell did I just watch after the credits started rolling. This episode subverted my expectations and not in a good way, and that's why it takes the number 8 spot. As the title of this episode suggests, the Season 4 mid-season premiere turned its attentions to showing the viewers what happened after the Governor's final assault at the prison. Well, it turns out that what happened after for Rick and Carl was actually pretty damn boring. With Rick out for the count for the majority of this episode, this installment is probably the most Carl-centric chapter to be found in The Walking Dead's library, which is in my mind why it's also one of the worst. See, the reason being is that although I've grown to like Carl over the last few seasons, during his younger days he was bloody annoying. Look, all I'm saying is that if the Season 1 to Carl had died from a walker bite, you wouldn't find me moaning about it like I am now. Instead, I'd probably be celebrating. Alas, Carl will be leaving The Walking Dead just when he is at his most likeable. Not that I'm bitter about it or anything. Anyway, the reason why I found young Carl to be such a royal pain in the arse is because of his knack to act like an idiot. And in After, act like an idiot he most certainly does. When I witnessed him act like a cocky brat as he attempted to draw out a pair of walkers only to be blindsided by another emerging from a bush, I felt no sympathy nor did I fear for him. Honestly, I just wanted him to get eaten. This scene reminded me of way back in Season 2 when he was throwing rocks at the walker stuck in the mud, the same walker that would go on to kill Dale. It was his naivety and stupidness then that ultimately resulted in Dale dying, and here he was doing almost the same thing again. It was like he really hadn't learnt anything. If it was the writer's intentions to make me like Carl during this episode, then sadly they desperately failed. Aside from Carl acting like an idiot, the rest of the episode focused on Carl not really doing a lot of note, sandwiched between some really weird Michonne flashbacks and Rick having a good old kip. I get that the show felt the need to slow things down after the installment that came previously, but my god this episode is dull. And like the previously mentioned Chubacabra, if I am ever to watch The Walking Dead from start to finish again, I'll most likely skip watching this episode. I have absolutely no reservations with describing the first half of Season 6 in particular to be a massive time waste. Splitting a couple of days of storyline over 8 episodes was always going to result in pacing issues, and the episode now is a prime example of The Walking Dead at its slowest and most wasteful. Truth be told, not a lot at all happens during this episode. I wonder how many times I've already said that during this video. Anyway, back to the topic at hand, I think I would be hard pressed to find many Walking Dead fans who can remember the actual plot of this entry, seeing as it is so forgettable. In addition, the tiny amount of plot that can be found in this episode is pretty dire. I mean, take Rick's return to Alexandria as an example. During the episode Thank You, viewers wondered how Rick would escape the Walker herd after the RV he was travelling in is shot to pieces. Well, it turns out Rick managed to escape by just running the entire distance. He just ran the whole way back, like Mo Farah. Rick Grimes is Mo Farah. There you go, there's another confirmed fan theory for you. Have fun with that one. Anyway, for me this whole sequence didn't really make any sense like most of Season 6. Apart from Rick doing an impression of a marathon runner, the other main plot point of this episode focused on Maggie going into the sewers to find Glenn, only to then turn around and return to Alexandria after revealing she was pregnant. The only moment I really liked from this episode was seeing Jesse show no fear in putting Betsy down, whoever she was. Sadly, this moment was kind of ruined for me when almost immediately after, Jesse attempted to inspire the rest of Alexandria by giving a theatrical speech. If you've seen my video on why I dislike the 6th season of the show, you know I detest the fact that so many characters spent far too much time trying to give spine-chilling speeches which all just came off feeling really corny. For me, now is a pretty awful episode in an awful season. First Time Again is the second and final season premiere to be included on this list, and whilst this probably won't serve as much as a shock as the Season 4 premiere, seeing as everyone already knows my feelings on the 6th season of the show by now, I would still hazard a guess that the episode probably wouldn't feature on many people's other worst episode lists. However, like the Season 4 premiere 30 Days Without an Accident, this episode went against my expectations and not in a good way. Even though I found Season 5 to be a bit of a drag once the group settled in Alexandria, on the whole it was a pretty decent season, and I actually found the contrasting stories of Morgan and Rick to be really interesting. I like the fact that come the end of the season it was like the two had effectively swapped places. Rick had now become the more unhinged and dangerous character, whereas Morgan had become the more peaceful and moral character, something you could argue Rick was when viewers first met him. With that in mind, I was very much looking forward to seeing how the pair's reunion would play out, especially as the season 5 finale had ended on a cliffhanger in which Morgan walked in on Rick killing Pete. Unfortunately, this reunion never played out in real time and was pretty much brushed over in awful black and white flashbacks. I get the need to try something new every once in a while, but again, like 30 Days Without an Accident, I was just overcome with this feeling that I was watching a different show completely. Instead of taking the time to focus on Rick and Morgan, First Time Again was too focused on spectacle. I remember seeing a ton of promotion before the premiere aired centered on the fact that the episode would feature the greatest number of walkers on screen ever. My reaction at the time is very much the same as it is now. Who cares? See, the thing is, having a huge amount of walkers on screen doesn't make for a good episode or a good storyline in fact, because Rick's plan of playing the Pied Piper and leading walkers from the quarry was idiotic. I'm not going to mention it anymore as I've already spoken about it at length, but it definitely contributes to my reasons as to why I dislike this episode. For me, all this installment did was single the start of a season in which its first half was centered on an extremely done plot point. I know I often complain about pacing and things being too slow, but I honestly feel that if the creative team behind The Walking Dead had worried less about trying to get as many walkers on screen as possible and more about exploring Morgan's and Rick's relationship, which you know was a pretty big thing during the last half of season 5, I would have been much more invested in this season opener than I was. And so we come to the last of my 3 consecutive entries on this list from season 6, with the penultimate episode of said season East. Now, one of the things I hated most about season 6 and in fact season 7 was how it portrayed Carol as turning into a miserable and depressed reluctant killer. I'd find it strange that Carol didn't give a crap when she was blowing up Terminus to pieces, yet here she was now crying every time she ran into conflict. For me, this teary-eyed nonsense got old very quick, and I'm glad we haven't seen any of this from her this season. On that note, I'm also glad that the old machine gun up the sleeve trick hasn't featured again, because this moment was absolutely dreadful. It wasn't cool or clever, it was just stupid. I mean, what's next? Is she going to pull a grenade out of her nostrils, cough up a sword from her stomach, whip out a rocket launcher from her vagina? Okay, I'm sorry, but surely you get my point. There's being able to suspend your disbelief, and then there's this. What's even worse is that the show made a point of showing Carol's necklace and some blood during the opening sequence just to troll viewers into thinking she actually might die, only to then have her escape her dreadful situation in the most nonsensical way possible. Speaking of trolling viewers, I find the cheap cliffhanger at the end of the episode to be just as bad, if not worse than the Carol moment found at the start. In case you've forgotten, the episode ends with Dwight getting the drop on Daryl before putting a bullet in him, at which point very bad looking CGI blood fills the screen before things fade to black. Just before the credits roll, Dwight can be heard saying he'll be alright, making this in my mind one of the most pointless cliffhangers of all time. I mean, having a character be shot only for the episode to end without being able to witness the outcome is bad enough, but then to have the character who shot them tell them and the audience they will be alright kind of defeats the entire point of having the character be shot in the first place. It's almost as if the writers didn't have the balls to simply end the episode with Daryl being shot due to fear of a backlash, so they decided to have Dwight say that he'll be alright to reassure fans that no, Daryl isn't dead. However, this begs the question, why even have this cliffhanger take place if you're too scared to fully commit to it? It's a bizarre ending to a bizarre episode, and it's one that I won't be ever watching again in any great hurry. Ugh, the deer. The deer. Just look at this deer. If I'm honest, I could probably just mention this awful looking attempt at CGI as my sole reason for disliking this episode and leave it at that. But despite how truly terrible it does look, it's not my main reason for saying no to say yes. Rather, I would say the entire episode is on par with this deer, and by that I mean it's crap. Yeah, not my most subtle comparison, I'll admit, but there you go, I am recording this late in the evening and I'm getting tired and I have work tomorrow, so just deal with it. Anyway, enough about me, more about this episode, which takes the chance for lovers Rick and Michonne to have some alone time at the fairground in which they laugh, eat, sleep, and bore me to tears. Tara also has a weird conversation with Judith which comes off across as laughable but not for the right reasons, and Rosita spends her time moaning about how she wants to kill Negan even though the idea is ridiculous and would only end up with her getting killed. Rosita's conversational partner Father Gabriel is probably the most likeable and sensible cast member to be found during this installment. After looking back on this episode now and all the fuss that was caused by this pesky very much real animal, you know what, I'm not even sure it's the worst moment to be found in this episode. No, in fact I think the dumbest scene is when The Walking Dead attempts to make viewers think that Rick is dead when in fact he is just hiding under a box like Solid Snake. I mean, do the writers really expect us to believe that Rick Grimes would perish under a flipping Ferris wheel? Come on, give us some credit. Sticking with the Metal Gear theme, Rick's reveal is even worse than his initial disappearance and reeks of pure Kojima, as there's a moment in Rick throws Michonne her katana and the scene temporarily goes into slow-mo as the sword is flying through the air. It's just bad. Really bad. It's like something a 12-year-old would think of as being cool, and it reminded me of this really awful gas mask scene in Kong Skull Island. Well, that was bloody terrible, and so was this episode of The Walking Dead. Well, you all probably knew this episode was coming at some point, and Swear finds itself taking the number 2 spot on this list. Swear is often regarded as the worst ever episode of The Walking Dead by many, and in fact in my first draft of this script this episode placed as my most hated episode as well. However, after thinking it through, I realised that although this installment is pretty bad, there is one more episode which I dislike even more than Swear, but I'll get to that in a moment. Strangely enough, as bad as Swear is, I actually found the episode itself didn't start off too badly. I liked the opening sequence of Heath and Tara conversing with one another, and I feel that if they both featured throughout the whole episode, it wouldn't have turned out to be the disaster that it ended up as. However, as alluded to, Heath quickly disappeared not long into the episode, leaving Tara to carry the remainder of said installment on her very incapable shoulders. I've long complained about The Walking Dead's tendency to split characters and groups across multiple episodes, and this is the best example of how badly things can go as a result of this. Even if you like the character of Tara, I just don't think her character is interesting enough to pull off an episode solely focused on her. Some characters are just not meant to be the focal point of a show, and instead are better in a support type role. Tara is one of those. Admittedly, Alana Mattison's task wasn't made any easier by the awful script handed to her. Now I know that Tara is a bit of a dorky girl, but she truly made some awful quips and jokes during this installment that just didn't land at all. It was like she was trying to do a bad impression of a character from a Marvel movie, in the way she just resorted to trying to be funny when her life was in danger, removing any chance to build tension at all. The Walking Dead really isn't this kind of show, and his repeated poor attempts at humour just didn't work. In addition, I can't be the only one who finds the Oceanside group to be kind of silly. Okay, they aren't as bad as the Scavengers, but they do resemble more Mad Max than The Walking Dead, and the way in which Tara stumbled upon them in the first place was way too coincidental for me. Like many other episodes on this list, I wouldn't recommend watching this entry at all. What happened and what's going on is a question I often ask myself when I wake up naked in the middle of nowhere. Oh no, wait, the doctor said I shouldn't talk about this in my videos. What I mean is what happened and what's going on is categorically one of my most hated installments of The Walking Dead. Just ignore what I said previously. Now I've mentioned my reviews regarding this episode in the past only to be met by those who completely disagree, so I am prepared for a torrent of comments from people saying that I'm wrong and that they have also slept with my mother. But I can only be true to myself, and for me this installment was extremely painful to watch for all the wrong reasons. The main problem this episode has is that it's almost purely dedicated to Tyrese and seeing him live out his last hallucination-filled moments after being bit by a walker. The truth is, I just don't care for Tyrese and never have, so having an entire installment centered on him dying is about as appealing to me as repeatedly rubbing my palms across a cheese grater. Tyrese for me was always incredibly dull. As a character he didn't really stand out, and his resistance to violence and failure to accept the world around him caused me never really to warm to him. He just ended up reminding me a bit of Eeyore, with him always being mopey, dragging his heels along, waiting for someone to come along and cheer him up. And in a zombie apocalypse, ain't nobody got time for that. I do appreciate the need to give characters proper send-offs, but having almost an entire episode dedicated to one character's passing runs the risk of alienating those who don't really care about said character. I found the same thing happen to me during the season 4 finale in which Sasha died. I never really bonded with her character either during her run on the show, and the increased focus on her during the finale for me actually made her death less affecting. I'm not saying that when all characters die the plot should just quickly move on after a couple of minutes, however focusing too much time on her death can have the opposite effect of what one is aiming for. Furthermore, although the hallucinations that occurred in Tyrese's head were nice little fan callbacks, they were a bit unnecessary. I mean, did the governor really have to turn up and keep telling Tyrese that he needed to earn his keep every 10 seconds? Maybe if I liked Tyrese more, or if another character took on his role, I would have got more out of this installment. However, as it stands, 45 minutes focused on Tyrese dying is just about the only thing that is worse for me than a 45-minute episode focused on Tara. So there you have it, that is my list of the top 10 worst Walking Dead episodes. As always, please let me know your thoughts below. Do you agree with any of my choices? Are there any episodes I missed out? Or do you think I've completely got it wrong? Regardless of your opinion, please let me know. Until next time, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.